Okay, resuming recording with the section on human effects. Chemistry and metabolism of cannabis. Although the chemistry and metabolism of marijuana, i.e. the ways in which the drug is broken down and chemically transformed in the body, are technical topics not easily translated into everyday language, they are important. For example, contrary to popular belief, the plant material is quite complex, containing at least 421 individual compounds. Sorry, it's like one over, never mind. 61 of the chemicals which have been identified in the plant, the cannabinoids, are specific to cannabis. 10 are now routinely quantified, excuse me. N's versus L's. 10 are now routinely quantified in identifying cannabis samples. When smoked, some of the chemicals contained are further transformed by burning pyrolysis, let's say, into still other compounds. Plant material differs widely in the amount of the principal psychoactive ingredient, delta-9-tetrahydrocannabinol, THC for short, contained as well as in the proportions of other chemicals. Although the effects of cannabinoids other than delta-9-THC have been studied, much remains to be learned about their effects both singly and in interaction with one another. While for many practical purposes, the percentage of delta-9-THC is a useful guide to the psychoactivity of a drug sample, other chemical ingredients may ultimately prove to be important in modifying THC's effects, as well because of their own impact on the body. A good deal of valuable basic research has been done on THC, but it should be emphasized that it is only one ingredient of the natural material. Thus, some of the research on THC may be only partially relevant to the effects of the plant material itself. In addition, the ratios of the different cannabinoids found in cannabis change in response to the passage of time and storage conditions. Plants which have been specifically cultivated for their psychoactivity contain much more delta-9-THC than do those grown for fiber. Most of the cannabis growing wild in the United States derives from plants which were originally cultivated for their fiber, aka hemp, rather than drug content, so that they could be used in making rope and other non-drug products. Thus, the THC content of this wild cannabis in the United States rarely exceeds 1% THC, which isn't even enough to have a good time. Although there has been no representative random sampling of illicit marijuana that can provide an accurate indication of changes over time, there is evidence that material now sold is significantly higher in THC content than was true only a few years ago. Chemists at the University of Mississippi, who have been analyzing confiscated samples of cannabis for several years, have found increases on the order of 10 times in potency since 1974. Mexican brick, i.e. compressed kilogram quantities of marijuana, samples studied in 1974, averaged about a fifth of 1% of delta-9 THC. Mexican samples analyzed thus far in 1979 have averaged nearly 2%. Other cannabis samples, probably of Colombian origin, which were analyzed in 1979, have averaged over 4% THC content, and hash oil, a concentrated liquid marijuana extract not available on the street until up to a few years ago, has been found to have THC levels ranging from nearly 11% to 28%. Such stronger materials are more likely to lead to higher levels of intoxication and to possibly adverse consequences. As knowledge of cannabis chemistry and metabolism is increased and the role of various metabolites becomes more important, there has been a corresponding need to synthesize supplies of these substances. Research availability of these materials enables us to tease out their effects from those of other constituents. In the past year, several improved methods for synthesizing metabolites have been developed. The ability to synthesize marijuana compounds and metabolites in research quantities has accelerated work on the detection of marijuana in bodily fluids, as well as permitted studying the drug's metabolism. By radioactively labeling the substances involved, it is possible to trace their passage through the body. The chemistry of marijuana smoke has commanded a considerable attention in recent years. Some 150 compounds have been identified in the smoke itself. One of them, benzopyrene, is known to be a carcinogenic, is 70% more abundant in marijuana smoke than in tobacco smoke. There is also evidence that more tar is found in marijuana cigarettes than high-tar tobacco cigarettes. The metabolism of marijuana is only partially understood. Over 35 metabolites of delta-9-THC have thus far been identified, along with several dozen metabolites of other marijuana constituents. Ability to identify and trace the pathways of these chemicals in the body provides vital information concerning how they are stored and eventually eliminated. Such information is useful in helping determine the possible sites of action for long-term effects of marijuana. Detection and quantification of cannabinoids and their metabolites in bodily fluids continues to be an important problem. Sophisticated laboratory techniques are available for the precise measurement of cannabinoid levels in blood and other biological samples. More routine and simpler techniques have also been developed recently and are currently undergoing field testing. When this is completed and the techniques are generally available, hopefully by mid-1980, they will be useful for such purposes as the routine laboratory detection of marijuana-intoxicated automobile drivers, screening individuals for current marijuana use and treatment programs, etc. Yeah, that didn't work out. The earlier, more elaborate techniques have been important for research purposes, as well as to provide the necessary standards by which the results of more rapid and convenient techniques can be evaluated. A good beginning has been made in understanding marijuana chemistry and metabolism. It has enabled researchers to demonstrate that marijuana constituents cross the placental barrier and, as a result, may affect fetal development. The presence of cannabinoids in mother's milk also raises the question of possible impact on the infant of the marijuana-using mother. Greater understanding of the chemistry of marijuana has also raised the possibility that one or more of the synthesized components of cannabis in its original or chemically modified form may come to have therapeutic usefulness. Finally, our increased awareness of marijuana's chemical complexity and the ways in which components other than delta-9 THC modify the drug's effects may shed light on the common street belief that different types of marijuana have different effects not wholly related to their THC content. So, the acute effects. Although much recent interest has been focused on the possible long-term chronic effects of marijuana, it is important to recognize that some of the drug's acute effects on intellectual and psychomotor performance have definite practical significance. This includes the likelihood of impaired learning ability when marijuana is used by students during the school day, as well as adverse effects on driving and other complex psychomotor performance. Effects of the marijuana high on various aspects of psychological performance were systematically observed as early as the 1930s, and of course more subjective accounts of marijuana's effects exist that long antedate a scientific description. These earlier clinical descriptions have generally been verified by more systematic research investigation. A wide range of impairment of intellectual performance was initially found and included such tasks as digit symbol substitution, a timed task in which the individual substitutes a series of symbols for numbers. Okay, yeah, I can see why the focus would work downwards on that one. Choice reaction time, a reaction time test in which the response depends on rapidly discriminating between choices. Yeah, we're not great at that. An ability to repeat in forward and backward order a succession of digits, short-term memory loss, and to mentally make a succession of repeated subtractions. And many other task performances, including concept formation, reading comprehension, and speech, have also been found to be impaired to a greater or lesser extent. Generally, such impairment has been found to be related to several kinds of variables, including the dose of the drug, the level of motivation, and the individual's tolerance to marijuana, and the complexity and familiarity of the task being performed. More familiar, less demanding tasks are less interfered with than those involving new material, more difficult task requirements. A common denominator in the impairment of functioning is the effects of marijuana on short-term memory. Marijuana appears to interfere with the transfer of material from immediate to longer-term memory storage, and I was already a spaz and had problems with that before I started. When marijuana is smoked, the ability to recall material learned while high is typically impaired. This impairment occurs with a wide variety of verbal as well as graphic material. The body of research evidence accumulated to date indicates that marijuana intoxication has a detrimental effect on memory functioning, in that material learned while high is significantly less well recalled than that learned in a non-drug state. We just need to get high again, ask Howie. This is especially true when this task involves recalling the learned material rather than simply its recognition. There are now dozens of experimental studies which have been conducted, all of which are generally consistent. While the marijuana's acute effects on memory and cognition vary with the task amount used, they are almost invariably detrimental. Although there have been no studies directly assessing the impact of marijuana intoxication on classroom learning, the similarities with laboratory experiments which have been done make it virtually certain that the drug interferes with classroom performance as well. Since there is now evidence that substantial numbers of high school students are using marijuana during their course of the school day, it's likely that its use is having a detrimental effect on their classroom functioning and knowledge acquisition. Acute marijuana intoxication and complex psychomotor performance in driving and flying. Most of us drive, not all of us fly. There is good evidence that marijuana use at typical social levels definitely impairs driving ability and related skills. Studies indicating impairment of driving skills include laboratory assessment of driving-related skills, driver simulator studies, test course performance, actual street driver performance, and as previously reported, a study conducted for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration of drivers involved in fatal accidents. As use becomes increasingly common and socially acceptable, and as the risk of arrest for simple possession decreases, more users are likely to risk driving while high. A limited survey from 60 to 80% of marijuana users questioned indicated they sometimes drive while high. Marijuana use in combination with alcohol is also quite common, and the risk of the two drugs in combination may well be greater than that posed by their substance alone. A study of drivers involved in fatal accidents in the greater Boston area was conducted by Boston University Accident Investigation Team. They found that marijuana smokers were overrepresented in fatal highway accidents as compared to a control group of non-users of similar age and sex. A more recent study conducted by the California State Department of Justice found that of nearly 1,800 blood samples taken from drivers arrested for driving while intoxicated, 16% were positive for marijuana. Where no alcohol was present in the blood sample, about 10% of the samples, the incidence of marijuana detected rose to 24%. Okay, so 24% of the 10% where there was no alcohol. Okay. Additional studies of motorist impairment related to marijuana use are being conducted. Are they saying the marijuana detected rose to 24% of the whole? Okay. Once again, weird government statistical statements. There are therefore several converging lines of evidence that driving performance is impaired under the influence of marijuana via the user's subjective assessments of their driving skills while high, measures of driving-related performance, a limited study of actual highway fatalities, and a study of individuals arrested for driving while intoxicated. The parameters of impairment for the average driver under various dosages of marijuana cannot yet be adequately specified. It is important to develop reliable standards for what constitutes driving under the influence of cannabis so as to discourage potentially dangerous driving. At present, it is clearly desirable to discourage driving while high and to make drivers aware that it is a significant risk. While there have been no recent studies, previous research findings indicate that experienced pilots undergo marked deterioration in performance under flight simulator test conditions while high. Thus, flying while marijuana intoxicated is clearly dangerous. Use your your autopilot. A continuing danger common to both driving and flying is that some of the perceptual or other performance decrements resulting from marijuana use may persist for some time, possibly several hours, beyond the period of subjective intoxication. Under such circumstances, the individual may attempt to fly or drive without realizing his or her ability to do so is still impaired, although he or she no longer feels high. Pulmonary effects. What will it do to your lungs? It will trash them. Because marijuana is typically smoked, its possible adverse effects on the lung and pulmonary function have long been of concern both here and abroad. It is noteworthy in one of the earliest attempts to assess the health and social implications of cannabis use, the report of the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission of 1893 to 94 includes observations about its pulmonary effects that are surprisingly similar to more contemporary observations. For example, this report mentions a possible value in the treatment of asthma because of the drug's pulmonary sedative qualities. However, it goes on to say the long continued smoking doubtless results in the deposition of finely divided carbonaceous matter in the lung tissues, and the presence of other irritating substances in the smoke ultimately causes local irritation of the bronchial mucous membrane, leading to increased secretion and resulting in the condition which is described as chronic bronchitis in ganja smokers. Ganja is the Indian term for a type of smoked cannabis preparation intermediate in potency between marijuana and hashish. Okay, so it does have like an actual specific meaning. It's not just slang. Okay. Good to know. This report makes another observation, strikingly descriptive of present-day marijuana use, and ganja smoking. The inspiratory act is far greater and more prolonged, a larger volume of smoke entering the lungs, than in cigarette smoking. Such deep inhalation of marijuana may well offset the typically smaller amount smoked as compared to cigarette smoking. One indication of this is to be found in a study comparing marijuana and cigarette smokers, which found that smoking less than one joint per day decreases of vital capacity, the amount of air the lungs can expel following a deep breath, as much as smoking 16 cigarettes per day. Although the ratio found needs to be confirmed by more extensive research, it suggests that the mode of marijuana inhalation, the way it is consumed, may result in disproportionately adverse pulmonary effects as compared to modern cigarettes. Part of this difference may be accounted for by the fact that present-day cigarettes are filtered and have significantly lower levels of tar than was true in the past. Marijuana joints are unfiltered and virtually entirely consumed. Moreover, under conditions of ready availability, there is some evidence that the number of joints consumed may approach that of tobacco cigarettes as high as 10 per day, because people like to have fun. I would also like to add, because I haven't seen a study or looked up a study about comparing smoking flower versus smoking vape concentrate, because I know the latter is ruining my lungs, but I'm not bringing up nearly the sort of dead black mucus stuff from my lungs I was when I was smoking flower. So take that as you may. The only advice I'll give you is if you switch to vaping and carts, keep your ears very clean, because you can blow out the pressure in your head, and that does not feel good. Thus far, there is no direct evidence that smoking marijuana is correlated with lung cancer. The American experience has been too brief for this to be a likely outcome. Nevertheless, there is good reason for concern about the possibility of pulmonary cancer resulting from extended use over several decades. Like tobacco smoke rituals, so-called tar cannabis rituals, when applied to the skin of experimental animals, have been shown to be tumor-producing. Analysis of marijuana smoke has also found evidence that it contains larger amounts of cancer-producing hydrocarbons. For example, benzopyrene, a known cancer-producing chemical found in tobacco smoke, has been reported to be 70% more abundant in marijuana smoke. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention was the deep inhalation thing. You smoke vapes very differently than you smoke joints, and yeah. I think it's also a generational thing, because I keep trying to explain to my 20-plus-year-old spouse that, like, you don't need to do your lungs a disservice and beat them up like that just to have a good time. I promise you. All right? I promise you. Cilia, which assists in moving inhaled dust and other small foreign particles from the lungs, have been found to be adversely affected by marijuana smoke. Following exposure to marijuana smoke, antibacterial defense systems in the lung have been shown to be less effective against Staphylococcus aureus, a bacterium causing a serious form of pneumonia. While similar effects have not yet been demonstrated in humans, it would be surprising if they did not occur, and they may be expected to be dose-related. The greater amount and frequency of use, the greater the likelihood of adverse pulmonary and other consequences. Serious effects on the lungs have been found in rats exposed to marijuana smoke in quantities producing blood cannabinoid levels similar to those of human daily users. The animals were made to inhale the smoke in a specially constructed apparatus at daily intervals for periods corresponding to an eighth to one-half of their normal lifespan. Extensive lung inflammation and degenerative changes were found, similar to but more severe than those produced by exposure to tobacco smoke. The authors conclude that in addition to the irritating effects of smoke, the cannabinoids chemical specific to marijuana, quote, may have a direct undesirable effect on pulmonary function, end quote. There have been several clinical studies of human users which have reported such symptoms as laryngitis, cough, hoarseness, bronchitis, and cellular change in chronic marijuana and hashish smokers, which resemble those of heavy tobacco smokers. In one of these, a study of American soldiers stationed in Europe, these symptoms were serious enough for the chronic hashish users involved to seek medical treatment. While studies of small numbers of chronic cannabis users in Jamaica, Greece, and Costa Rica did not find evidence of lung pathology, this may have been because traditional users in these countries do not inhale cannabis smoke as deeply as retain in their lungs as do American users. From the total body of clinical and experimental evidence accumulated to date, it appears likely that daily use of marijuana leads to lung damage similar to that resulting from heavy cigarette smoking. Since marijuana users often smoke both tobacco and marijuana, the effects of the combination require additional study. Reproductive effects. Whoa, damage your baby. Effects on reproduction have been attributed to marijuana as far back as the earliest Cannabis Commission's scientific report, that of the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission of 1894. While commenting on a sexual stimulant effect similar to that of alcohol, the report also describes cannabis as, quote, used by aesthetics in this country, i.e. India, with the ostensible object of destroying sexual appetite, end quote. Quite apart from the drug's psychologically related reproductive effects, there have been numerous experiments with animals detailing effects on organs, processes, and hormone levels related to reproduction. At doses generally much higher than those used by humans, the evidence is consistent. Cannabis causes decreases in the weight of organs such as testes and ovaries, as well as altering various hormone levels that are involved in reproduction and lactation. Some more recent studies have examined the effect in animals of drug doses more clearly comparable to heavy use in humans. There have also been a few experiments in which researchers have attempted to study human reproductive effects directly. With respect to human males, some have found a decrease in levels of serum testosterone correlated with heavy marijuana use, although several others have not. One explanation for this apparent discrepancy in experimental findings is that after smoking marijuana, the temporarily depressed levels of testosterone may rapidly return to more usual levels. Depending on the time schedule in which sampling is done, the effect may be missed. Even when testosterone decreases have been found, the levels have been within normal limits. Whether more persistent chronic use of marijuana might result in permanently depressed levels of serum testosterone is not known at this time. That could be fun to look up. 2 studies of the semen of male chronic users have found abnormalities in sperm count, motility, and in the structural characteristics of the sperm examined. That must be a fun study. In one of these, the semen of 16 healthy young males smoking marijuana under controlled conditions was studied. The levels of use, while high, 8 to 20 joints per day, were comparable to those of other very heavy users in the general population. Decreases in sperm count and motility were found, together with evidences of structural abnormality in the user's sperm. A second study of Greek chronic users also found structural abnormalities in sperm that were associated with heavy use. While the clinical implications of these animal and human findings are by no means certain, decreased fertility might well result, especially in those of already marginal fertility. In the more controlled laboratory study, there was apparent gradual return to normal functioning when marijuana use was discontinued. That'd be kind of cool. Temporarily birth control without having to deal with hormones? Anyway, sorry. To date, late 1979, there have been no published reports of abnormal offspring of fathers which have been related to their marijuana use. Yeah, I've never heard of marijuana causing any flipper babies. Have you? Whether or not alterations in reproductive function might have greater significance for the developing child or adolescent is not known at this time, although this is a concern since the younger user is probably more vulnerable. When we turn to the question of marijuana's effects on the female reproductive system, there is some recent animal experimentation with doses comparable to those in actual societal use that suggests possible adverse consequences. Results to date are, however, far from definitive. One study using THC at levels which the authors describe as equivalent to moderately heavy marijuana usage in the United States found that the rate of reproductive loss in THC-treated female rhesus monkeys was about 4 times greater than that in drug-free controls. The majority of these losses represented deaths, abortions, or resorptions of the fetus. No clear pattern of female abnormality was evident. The authors conclude that their experimental results raise the possibility that exposure of the human female to marijuana in amounts relatively common use may be associated with increased risk of reproductive loss. So you may miscarry, or may be more likely to miscarry. A study of female straight users, women using marijuana on their own and of unknown potency, has also raised questions about the possible reproductive effects of cannabis on women. In this research, 26 women in their 20s used marijuana 3 times a week or more for 6 months were compared to a non-using group of women of similar age. The experimental group had a significantly higher frequency of abnormal menstrual cycles in which they failed to ovulate, produce a ripened egg, or showed possible evidence of a shortened period of potential fertility, shortened luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. Lowered prolactin levels, a hormone important after childbirth and producing adequate mother's milk, were also found, suggesting that nursing might be impaired in marijuana-using women following childbirth. While such findings are of considerable interest, they must be regarded as preliminary. The drug-using women also used larger amounts of alcohol than did the controls, which may have contributed to the result, and there may have been other differences in lifestyle which contribute to the experimental outcome. Nevertheless, both animal and human data raise the distinct possibility that fertility may be impaired in heavy marijuana users as a result of their use. Studies which have been done in countries of more traditional cannabis use are of little value in clarifying this question, since male use overwhelmingly predominates among traditional users. This is kind of interesting just to me because, I started having some odd period symptoms. I'm like, is stuff shutting down early? My doctor's like, no, I think it's from the medication you take. And now that I see this, I'm like, maybe it was the THC also. Experiments with radioactively labeled THC enabling its progress to the body to be traced clearly indicate that the drug appears in the milk of nursing monkey mothers and in their offspring when the drug is administered to the mothers. There is also good evidence that THC and other cannabinoids pass through the placental barrier, reaching the fetus during uterine development, where they tend to concentrate in the fetus's fatty tissue, including the brain. While pre- and postnatal changes related to maternal use have usually only been found with larger doses in animals and have not been reported in humans, the distinct possibility that marijuana use during pregnancy might result in abnormal fetal development makes its use during pregnancy very unwise. I agree. While much remains to be learned about the possible effects of marijuana in reproduction, several points are reasonably clear. Marijuana at higher doses has a range of effects relevant to reproduction in animals. These appear to result from a variety of mechanisms, including the drug's effect on adrenal function and hormone production in testes and ovaries. More recently, at dose levels that might be encountered in the heavy regular user, possible adverse consequences for fertility in both males and females have been identified. Such effects may be of greater importance for the marginally fertile or the developing adolescent than for the mature, healthy adult. Finally, given the many unknowns concerning possible effects on the human fetus, use of marijuana during pregnancy should be especially discouraged. Cardiovascular effects. Although cardiovascular effects of marijuana have been investigated extensively, such research in humans has been largely restricted to healthy young male volunteers, in whom the effects appear to be limited in duration and generally benign. One such study examined the short-range effects of smoking 1 to 3 marijuana cigarettes on 21 male experienced smokers participating in a 94-day in-hospital study of heavy marijuana smoking. They found, as have others, a significant increase in heart rate after smoking, although not as clearly dose-related as previous findings. They attribute the lack of a clear dose relation to tolerance that developed for the cardiovascular effects of the drug as a result of chronic use. The changes they found in heart functioning were secondary to the temporarily increased heart rate and appeared to be free of adverse consequences. As previous editions of this report emphasized, however, there is evidence that in patients with already impaired heart function, use of marijuana may precipitate chest pains, angina pectoris, more rapidly and following less effort than tobacco cigarettes. This possible difference in the response to marijuana in heart disease patients may prove to be of considerable practical significance if use expands to include older populations or if presently young adult users continue to use cannabis as they progress through middle life. Okay, so be careful with your heart as usual, Dave. Despite limited evidence to date, a warning to heart patients and others who may have impaired cardiac function not to use marijuana continues to be justified.